Alright, I know everything in this series so far has probably sounded crazy to you if you are unfamiliar with Velikovsky and catastrophism and electric universe and plasma physics principles. Everything really that I talk about here has science that backs it up, okay? So it's important to understand that Velikovsky is not just some crazy dude who just went off the rails and started writing a bunch of stuff and was like, yes, Venus attacked Earth, and then I'm crazy, and then, oh my goodness, there was lightning, and then gods, and Egypt, and then, Moses. He didn't do that. He wasn't like crazy. In fact, Velikovsky's probably one of the smartest people I've ever read. His stuff is unbelievably in-depth, especially his other books that goes into a lot of all of this. He goes into the historical side in some of his other books. But this series is focusing on worlds in collision. Now, if you stuck with it so far up till this point, good, congratulations, keep going. I know a lot of this stuff probably sounds crazy to you. Don't forget, everything that Velikovsky says, it is indeed backed up by quite a bit of science. And to prove this point, Velikovsky he made the prediction that they would find radio waves being emitted by Saturn. Guess what they found? Radio waves being emitted by Saturn. Velikovsky predicted that using the scientific method. Velikovsky also predicted that the surface of Venus would be smoother and it would be incredibly hot. Now you might say, well, duh, Venus is right next to the sun. Of course it's going to be hot. But what Velikovsky predicted is that the surface of Venus would it would emit more heat than it absorbs from the sun. Now that's a problem for a cosmologist and a physicist, because that energy has to come from somewhere, and it's not coming from the sun. And we now know we're now pretty dang sure where it comes from, but we'll get into that later. But Velikovsky called these kinds of predictions, and he used science. So it's important to listen to this stuff, because at the end of the day, it's real science. And we can apply real scientific principles, like the stuff that Velikovsky brings up, and now we can attach those to ancient historical references, and we can start making sense of what our ancestors experienced, thousands of years ago. Because that's what we're missing as an ancient historical researcher. So much of ancient history is just crazy talk, man. It's just insane. That's why people don't take it seriously, is because when you have Zeus throwing lightning bolts, what do you do with that as a grounded... I get it, grounded, okay. As a grounded researcher, what do you even say about that? All you can say is you can only say that, well, I guess they were crazy. They imagined some bearded dude in the sky and he just threw lightning bolts at people and did weird, they have no choice. They have to just say that our ancestors were crazy. But what if they weren't crazy? What if our ancestors were legitimately recording what they saw? And due to translation issues and just the way they describe stuff, we've lost the original message. And of course, the original message has also been twisted by countless organizations for their own purposes, etc. All right, that's another topic for another time. All right, so let's get back to the book Worlds in Collision and where we are at. So the part of the book that I'm reading to you guys in small sections, he starts out the Venus chapters or areas with him just describing something as a comet that is dealing a tremendous amount of damage and affecting the planet Earth. And there's also other stuff going on cosmologically in the sky as well. I don't think we've gotten to all of that yet. And then he will eventually transition over into talking about the comet being Venus. And then we'll cover all of that when we get there. So I want to set the stage for some of the stuff that he's talking about so that you have kind of a scientific frame of reference about what's going on. So he is going to continue to talk about the historical references, which is fantastic. And he'll eventually get to some of the science, but there's so much science involved. Even his books, as detailed as they are, they can't possibly cover all of it. The amount of stuff that is going on scientifically during these close encounters, it's insane, and it covers all kinds of sciences. I guess you could technically boil it down to one science, electrical science, but that's being nitpicky. All right, so basically we have all kinds of scientific principles being thrown into the mix here, right? We're going to have meteorology, we're going to have geology, we are going to have cosmology, we are going to have biology, and we are going to have just all kinds of sciences that are going to have to be employed if you're going to start to truly understand what happened in our past, to do any of this stuff, if you don't have a working knowledge of at least the fundamentals of quite a few sciences nowadays, you're basically screwed. And I honestly believe that this is one of the main things that scares people away, because once you start learning about an ancient historical event or something like that, you very quickly realize that you have to at least have some basic knowledge in, say, geology if you're going to understand stratigraphy, right? If, biology plays a big part, obviously, in ancient humans' past. So you have to understand the basics of something to do with biology, right? And then that, of course, leads you to genetics, because, obviously genetics is going to matter when you're studying history. So you very quickly find yourself in a position to where you suddenly have to understand quite a lot of sciences just to get a basic or fundamental idea of what truly happened in our past. And it doesn't really matter what ancient topic you're talking about. Here we're dealing with catastrophism and general ancient history and general, mythologies, etc. But it doesn't matter what you're studying, right? All of these sciences matter to some degree. Anyway, so they're just as important here when we're dealing with catastrophism. But with catastrophism, we now have to add other sciences and even deeper levels of the sciences that I just mentioned to our repertoire to truly grasp what our ancestors are talking about. So in this case, now we have to learn more about cosmology. Now you have to learn more about plasma physics, which then leads you to having to have some sort of understanding of electricity. So there's all these sciences that we have to get a grasp on. And so what I do recommend is going out to like the Thunderbolts Project or other places that talk about plasma physics, etc., and get a fundamental understanding of those real sciences, because that's going to help you understand what Velikovsky's talking about. All right, that's enough ranting on everything you need to do. That's a whole show in and of itself. I think I've kind of done it. Anyway, let's go over some of the topics that we've seen Velikovsky talk about. Let's start with fire raining down from the sky. Now, when people hear fire rain down from the sky, your average person immediately goes to volcanic activity, right? And Velikovsky has talked about hot stones raining down from the sky, fire raining down from the sky, right? Your fire and brimstone sort of thing, that kind of crazy stuff. And your average person will immediately think of what? They're going to think of a volcano, right? A volcanic eruption. A volcanic eruption does indeed have the potential to create those kinds of conditions to a degree. Now, volcanic eruptions do indeed play a large part in catastrophism, but unfortunately, the mainstream likes to make it sound as if they are the sole provider of the fire and brimstone, right? So if you were to talk to your standard scholar, they would just say, oh yeah, those ancient people were stupid. They just didn't understand what a volcano was. And when a volcano goes off, it rains down fire and rock and blah, blah, blah. All right, so what do we do with this? Okay, well, here's another approach to this. Right now, Velikovsky's describing a comet crossing our orbit. What does a comet have? It's got a tail. What's in the tail? Debris. So as Earth crosses over into the comet's tail, what's going to happen? Yeah, we're going to get pelted with hot rock. And that's exactly what all of our ancestors describe at certain points in times in history. Now, we're just talking about the Venus event at this point in time, but there's all kinds of times in Earth's past that we've been pelted with hot rocks, and these rocks are no joke. So Velikovsky went over and he said, first it starts as a light dust. And that makes sense, right? So you have the light dust of the comet. That's where you first start to hit the tail. And then we move into the description of suddenly now we're finding gravel-size rocks falling down from the sky. And they're all hot. And they're all dangerous. Make no mistake, while this is happening, people are seriously afraid. And this is seriously impacting their lives. Now, as Earth travels more and more into the tail, then what's happening? We start to get to the heavier rocks, and they all describe this. Now we start to get into the boulder-sized rocks that start to fall from the sky, and the house-sized rocks that start to fall from the sky. And these rocks are no joke. They start to destroy everything all over the place, and everybody describes this. And this is exactly what we would expect to find if we were running into the tail of a comet. Right, we already see this when we run into the afterglow effects of a tail of a current smaller comets that are around here. right? Those tails are what's generating those meteor showers that we get hit with quite often. Or not often, but whenever you get your little alert on your phone of, hey, there's a meteor shower tonight. Generally, that meteor shower is probably left over from the tail of a comet that we're about to go into. Not an active comet at the moment, it's just the debris it left behind. Same thing with Venus. Oh, and by the way, if you're going to say, well, if a comet leaves behind debris, even after it's done and it's flowed by, where's all the debris from Venus as a comet? We have asteroid fields, don't we? Yeah. So here we find ourselves with even a different explanation for why we have asteroid belts in our solar system. Now we'll get to that later, and I think Velikovsky will probably cover it a little bit here as well. All right, so if we're getting into the mix of a comet, we have this crazy stuff going on. Our ancestors describe exactly what would happen. Now, earlier I said volcanoes play a part. Volcanoes do play a part. One of the things that geologists don't have a great understanding of, if at all really, is that they don't understand why volcanoes erupt the way they do and when they're going to, right? There's no successful predictions in geology when it comes to eruptions. They do their best and they've got data, and all power to them, by the way. I'm not talking bad about geologists. They're good people and they're doing good work, but the reality is they have no successful predictions to their name. They don't predict earthquakes and they do not predict volcano eruptions, right? How many times do you have to hear, Yellowstone might erupt in like next week or 10 million years from now, right? That's the level of prediction that current geology offers. So basically what that means is current geologists have no idea how the planet operates. They do not understand where earthquakes come from, and they do not understand why we have volcanic eruptions. When a comet passes by, we tend to find quite a lot of volcanic eruptions happen simultaneously as Earth begins to mix in with that comet. Why? Now, I'm not saying this is 100% true. There is a lot of research that we all need to still do, and we need those geologists to keep working. So if you're one of those geologists, keep going. But keep other outcomes, other possibilities in mind. So there's actually a lot of science that is starting to point to effects of faraway bodies interacting with Earth even today and creating seismic problems, right? So we know that a full moon can correlate with more earthquakes. That's interesting. There's now really good promising data that shows solar flares also correlating with seismic activity on Earth. Like, this is all relevant data, and this data is very easily tossed to the garbage by the mainstream. So if you're throwing away legitimate data, I mean, how do you do science like that? That's not how science works. You just follow the data. Anyway, so while we have Venus interacting with Earth, how else is Venus interacting with Earth? Well, don't forget, both Venus and Earth have an electromagnetic field. And the reason why they're attracting to one another, and the reason why they're really starting to affect one another on a scientific level, is because their electromagnetic fields are now touching and talking to one another. When you start to get electromagnetic fields interacting with one another, what happens? All kinds of things happen. But one of the things that can happen is you generate heat. And what can happen now, we don't know what the Earth is made of yet either, by the way. So, we can see these pictures of, you've got like the mantle, and you've got you've got all the different layers down to the core, and blah, blah, blah. We have no clue if that picture of the Earth is true. There's no reason to believe that picture is real. All right, that is just what geologists assume. But even if that's real, fine, who cares? The point is that when you have two large electromagnetic bodies interacting with one another, you better believe you are generating heat and problems, as the entire system tries to compensate for the electricity basically being passed between the two. So while these events are going on, Earth is basically being rent and just twisted, right? Torsion is a huge deal with this stuff. And sure enough, if you look at what geologists consider the plates on this planet, right? Geologists call them plates because they have no idea what else to call them. They don't look like plates. If you look at them objectively, they literally look like the Earth was just twisted. Somebody came along and just twisted it like a can. And that is exactly what we see in the geology of Earth. Now, as a side note, something fun, the Atlantic Ocean is obviously one of the areas that definitely looks like it got absolutely obliterated when it got twisted. What continent was in the Atlantic Ocean at this point in time? What would it take to bring down an entire continent overnight? Yeah, Yeah, it would take a planetary body like Venus to interact with the Earth to supply that kind of power to take out a continent. I won't get into that right now either, but it's just something to think about. Now, moving on to the waters on the planet, basically the oceans, right? Large bodies on Earth. The interesting thing about water is that water is not anchored to Earth, like say a mountain or a continent is, right? Right, ground is ground. We understand the difference, right? You know, water sloshes around on top of ground. Why does this matter? Okay, so if a body like Venus is interacting with Earth to such a degree that it is altering its orbit, either slowing its orbit down, as Velikovsky points out. Velikovsky goes to great lengths, actually, in a lot of his work to point out, hey, look, all of these cultures across the planet either have an extended day or an extended night, depending on what side of the planet their culture is on. Why would these people have a story like that if this didn't happen? Right, it makes no sense. And so once again, mainstream historians have no choice but to say these people are it's just crazy mythos. You know, they're just legends. These people are dumb. No, why don't we take them seriously? If Earth stopped, let's have fun. Let's just stop the planet. What would happen to Earth? Let's do a thought experiment. If we just stopped the planet, what would happen? Okay, well, one of the things that would happen is that one side of the planet would definitely experience a longer night. Of course, on the opposite side of the planet, they would all be experiencing a longer day. And sure enough, all over this planet, in the exact areas where we would see a day or a night, a prolonged day or prolonged night, it's there. So something happened. Something altered Earth. Something had to have. I mean, what else would have caused this, right? Well, and then they tell us what caused it. That's the funnier thing. All the cultures even tell us. They literally say that a large body literally flew by Earth and caused all these problems. Now, here's another problem for mainstream people. If you're going to say these people are dumb, how would these people know to make up these kind of stories that literally have science baked into them if these people are dumb? Right? It makes no sense. Our ancestors were not stupid. They were definitely put in really garbage situations, right? If we were dealing with that now, I promise you, your life would be entirely different. Maybe better, considering how today is. But it's not that our ancestors were stupid. They were just working with what they had. And with what they had to get the information down to us, it corroborates around the globe. Alright, so we have Venus crossing by, it's interacting with Earth, and as the closer it gets to Earth, the stronger the interaction. So one of the things that could have happened is that, sure enough, Venus could have slowed down the Earth's orbit. That's entirely possible. There's nothing weird about that. We're dealing with electromagnetism here. Electromagnetism is amazing when you deal with angular momentum and motion and all of that stuff. It's a completely different realm when you get away from gravity and relativity's garbage. Because you can do amazing things with electromagnetism. You know, all you UFO people out there, you know that. You guys are all looking at 0-point energy and all that crazy stuff. One of the reasons why you guys focus on electromagnetism in a lot of the reasons why you think UFOs have that is because it works, right? If you can control that, it works. You can levitate, no problem. The question is, how do you get the energy to do it, right? And that's also another discussion. Anyway, I'm not even going to get into any of that. So, if Venus is a large enough body, and it is, it's basically Earth's twin in size, it could definitely have the potential to stop and or slow down Earth's orbit. What happens when that happens? What happens if you have Earth that's rotating, it's going, it's moving, it's in motion, and all of a sudden it's being forcefully slowed down and or stopped? Well, there's a few things that are definitely going to happen. So the first thing that's going to happen is that the land of Earth all over, under the oceans, whatever, above everything is going to feel that torsion, because every point on Earth is a sphere, obviously, so every point on Earth is experiencing different angular momentum, right? The land you're on right now is moving at an angular momentum. There's velocity there. So if you stop that velocity, you know, into the bedrock, what's going to happen? Well, the Earth's going to tear itself apart in strata. And that's exactly what happens. And that is exactly what we see when we look on maps like Google Earth, for example. And that is exactly what it would take to literally sink continents or raise mountains overnight. I mean, that's all it takes. You just need an energy source. There is no reason to believe that this is not possible. It's 100% possible. And it's corroborated once again by all of our ancestors that had stories that survived. Can you imagine how many people didn't survive this? This is another thing. You probably, if you're with me so far, you're skeptic. Good, stay skeptical. But if you're with me so far, you're like, but okay, fine. If that happened, then that would be a lot of death. Correct. And there is a ton of death on this planet when these events hit. Make no mistake. Every one of the stories once again corroborates the untold numbers of people that just get wiped out. I mean, the bodies that are just strewn about in wreckage in the oceans for a while, they comment on this. They're like, dude, the bodies are everywhere. They're just like cordwood. And you can walk on the water on bodies alone. It's a real problem. Those people are dead. We don't get to hear their stories and their experiences. The only experiences we get to listen to later on down the line are from the survivors, right? And the survivors are working with very little because the entire Earth got absolutely wrenched, torsioned out of its mind. All right, so we have crust cracking like crazy. What else goes on? What else would happen? Well, water. We've got the oceans. Earth has a lot of water on its surface, relatively speaking. That water is not anchored like land. I think I already said that. See how much I babble? So what's going to happen is that water is not going to stop. The Earth stops, fine. It grinds to a halt, or at least it slows down. But what happens to the water? The water's angular momentum continues. And what happens when that happens? Well, the water just rushes over the planet. All right, and now that is what accounts for the huge amounts of tsunami evidence that we find all across this planet on a continental scale. The tsunami evidence is there. There's nothing to argue about. It's just something that nobody talks about all that often. And in fact, an entire theory was created to explain it away. And I'll talk about that later. But just as a quick little aside, the Ice Age was literally created as an excuse for why they were finding all of this tsunami floodwater evidence across all continents on this planet. Yeah, the Ice Age is not real. The Ice Age is BS. For example, there's no culture in the past that talks about 2-mile ice walls, right? Nobody talks about that. There's not a single culture that reports, oh crap, we would have gone north or we would have gone west, but no, 2 miles of ice. Nobody did that. Nobody said it because it didn't exist. All right, so moving on. The Earth is getting torsioned out of its mind. So what else is happening? Yeah, volcanoes are erupting all over the place. Why are volcanoes erupting? Because what's happening is that strata in the ground is just grinding against itself, right? And you know how much friction is going on if you have the planet, of the different layers of the planet, and its angular momentum is slowed and or stopped? You have all those layers also still spinning at various speeds. And now they have to stop, and they're just grinding against one another. And as they grind, they create tons of heat. And then what happens? We have volcanoes popping up all over the place. And once again, we find all ancient cultures talking about a time to where the Earth literally heated up. So the ground literally starts to melt in some areas. And okay, you say that, okay, fine, that could happen, sure. Scientifically, that's accurate, but where's the proof? There are huge lava fields on this planet. For example, in North America alone, there's a huge lava field that is literally hundreds of feet deep. And it did not happen over thousands or millions of years. It happened quick. And it's funny to watch geologists cope with that area. Well, I'll talk about that in another video. But they try to make up all these excuses, right? They do try to span it out. Oh yeah, there were like 7 different lava flows, and then it took, they don't know. They have no idea, dude. To watch them just stumble over themselves trying to explain why there is a gigantic lava field hundreds of feet thick that would have spread across North America. They have no idea. Anyway, this is how you get that. This is how you get that. You get another cosmological body in the vicinity of the planet Earth, and you get these levels of destruction. All right, the last thing I'll cover really quick, and then we'll go back to the next part and we'll start reading again. He went over hurricanes. Here's another thing that's going to be happening if you're going to be dealing with another large cometary body or cosmological body. You're going to have atmospheric effects, obviously. But you're also going to have the gases in the atmosphere reacting to everything that's going on. So as the Earth grinds to a halt, guess what else happens? Yeah, dude, you get literally huge hurricanes all across this planet. And once again, we have all kinds of cultures talking about hurricane and we get hurricane. This is where this comes from. These people literally get wiped out by hurricanes, and it's like it's just as bad as all the other catastrophes that are going on. I mean, they're all horrible, but you pair all of these things simultaneously, just like our ancient histories say, and there you go. You have the explanation. Here's a possible explanation for how all of this stuff that you might have originally thought was insane may have actually happened and is real. One other point I'll make, and then we'll call it. As I said earlier, one of the outcomes of all of this would of course been tons of death, right? One of the things that we should be able to track genetically is population growth and death numbers. Now, make no mistake, this is far from this isn't even a good science, really. Geneticists know this is not good, but the mainstream won't admit it. But what we can track is we can track where lineages come from genetically. If Earth had never been touched by any kind of cataclysms, then we would already be overrun with billions and billions and billions and billions of people. We would have hit billions hundreds and thousands of years ago. We would have already been at the billion mark. Right? We're only just getting there recently because only in the past, say, 1,000 years or so has Earth been in a calm, peaceful state to where humans were not constantly living in fear of being crushed and destroyed from various cosmological events. And if you're about to say right now, well, mortality rates with, medicine and blah, blah, blah. No, that's 100% wrong. Our new medicine has done nothing for population growth. Why? All you have to do is you have to look at third world countries and you can see their populations explode. Okay? They should literally be drowning in people right now, but they are not. Why? Why? It's because they literally, all of us, the entire planet, had literally hundreds of millions of people killed in the past few thousand years constantly. Humans are absolutely waking up from some horrible stuff, and we have absolutely forgotten what happened in our past. Alright, so we'll go on with Velikovsky. I just wanted to bring some scientific notation to this to make sure it's not all crazy. Just keep listening. It gets even better. This stuff is amazing. Alright.